Hi, this is Preston Squire. I'm the writer-creator of Brute, and you're listening to the True North Country Comic Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Preston Squire about his comic book series called Brute. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Preston is an actor, author, blogger, and e-publisher residing in Toronto, Ontario. He's been writing about cute and cuddly characters saving the day, the world, or the universe ever since he was a child. His work has appeared in newspaper, websites, blogs, magazines, and comics over the years. His first book is Isikis, the Dream Cat, part of the Dream Cat series. Preston also works with other authors to help them achieve greater online success. Along with illustrator Owen Keenan, his current work is called Brute. Brute is described as a story of a young human female and her best friend, a young male Bruin, who is incredibly strong, quick-tempered, durable, and just coincidentally looks like a teddy bear, who are both stranded in space, far from their homeworlds, unable to return. They're forced to depend on their wits and each other to get by and survive in an often cruel Wild West of the Milky Way galaxy. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Preston Squire about his comic book series called Brute. So, Preston Squire, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
I appreciate your time. What I usually do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I do remember. The first comic book that I read was Iron Man number 69. He is just been karate chopped by the Mandarin. His heart's given out and he's like floating up there, flying up into the sky unconscious, which is how they started off. That was my first comic, which clearly I still remember.
Yeah.
And left quite an impression on me. Iron Man was always my favorite hero as a kid, which was annoying because nobody else knew who he was.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't until we got the movie going where people went, wait a second, he's a character? Yeah.
Right.
So Robert Downey Jr. really put a lot into that character and made it come to life. For you, you had already known about it. So for you, were going, no big deal. But for a lot of other people, it's like, who is this guy? So they found out the hard way.
It was a huge deal for me. I finally felt vindicated when the rest of the world came over to my line of thinking.
That's right, for sure. Well, good stuff there. So the next question I have for you is, what's on your bedside reading table? What type of books are you reading?
Currently, I'm reading 3 books. I'm always reading something on comics, like how to further develop my skills as a comic writer or producer. Reading Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey right now because I'm on a kick to change up my finances and to see, how I can improve that aspect of my life. And then the Bible. I read a little bit out of that every day.
There you go. All good stuff. All good reading, that's for sure. So we're here talking about your current project, Brute. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about it and maybe what inspired you to create it.
Sure, absolutely. So Brute is the concept, but with the current story arc in Brute is you have Rose, who's a human who's been stranded in space with no way to get home. And she's befriended by the toughest guy in the galaxy, who only coincidentally happens to look like a teddy bear.
Okay.
But that's because he's from a high gravity world, so he's short, he's dense, he's got incredible reflexes, he's incredibly strong, and he's short-tempered. So don't ever call him cute. Form this kind of friendship because he's also trapped in space. He's got no way to get back to his home world, and so they have this commonality that brings them together. But he's got anger issues, she's got trust issues because she's been betrayed repeatedly. And so there's real interesting dynamic between them. that plays out. And really, like, that's, the first kind of arc in the story. And then the second arc, they get absorbed into this group of galactic bounty hunters that are not the most competent in the world. But with all the characters, and what really kind of intrigues me is that, growing up, you had characters like Spider-Man and Superman and stuff, and, all these very altruistic characters. And it wasn't until Alan Moore did The Watchmen, which really kind of put a new slant to it, which is, was, yeah, real people wouldn't really get dressed up in a costume and do that kind of thing unless they were like a little bit unhinged, and that was really an interesting concept. And I'm not writing superheroes here because, and these guys are not that altruistic, but I loved the concept of not just people struggling like Peter Parker, but people with real character flaws.
Right.
Yeah. People who are going through real stuff. And then they still, everybody's a hero in their own story. And so they still want to do the right thing. But then what does that look like when you have this kind of thing in your life? When you have trust issues and you don't really trust anybody, so you're just going to do everything by yourself, or you mean well, but then you have anger issues, and if anybody questions your integrity, you go off the handle. Or another character is this kind of samurai character where it's all about honor, and he's been disgraced, and he's so desperate to regain honor, but then he does stupid stuff in his attempt to regain honor. And, these guys, the way they just play off each other is beautiful, because really they're just broken people coming together to form a broken family and trying to do the right thing and not always succeeding. You just want to root for them because you see where their hearts are, and you see their flaws, and you see how they're like stumbling to overcome the flaws, and that's what's really intrigues me and really motivates me to write, is
Sure.
working through those kind of character dynamics.
I was wondering, though, with all that being said, what inspired you to create this specific story? Was there something that you had a light bulb and went, what if this happened?
It's a bit of a long story.
Sure.
Most of these, as a kid, I wrote comics, and some of the characters I created for that, but most of them actually came about because I was being a dungeon master for an RPG, which we did a storyline set in a few storylines set in space. Brute and several of the other characters were NPCs. They were non-playing characters I created to be not adversaries, but a competing interest for their group. And they were just so cool. It's like I just had to do something with them, and I've just been kicking them around for decades now. But yeah, they were just such cool characters. I was like, I've got to do something with it. And I actually tried multiple times in the past in different formats, and nothing really quite clicked, until about a few years ago, when I just got some new writing software. I just thought, let me try a new Brute story just to break it in. And I took it from a different angle, this time putting Rose as the front character instead of Brute. So it's kind of weird, because Brute is the name of the comic.
Right.
He's kind of the fawns, but Rose is the heart.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Right.
Now, you mentioned a teddy bear aspect to Brute. So
Yeah.
In my mind, I already have something, visualized. But who is your audience? Who do you think you're writing for specifically?
You know what? That has been something I've been struggling with for a while. But honestly, I think it's something that really can appeal to everybody, because these guys are very flawed people, and we all relate to pain.
Right. Okay.
We all relate to where they're coming from.
Sure.
What I'm finding is, I mean, a lot of adults love it. Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah,
Most of
that's
my
true.
audience
Yeah,
right now is
sure.
like middle-aged men and women,
There you go. People can relate to the
primarily. But
characters. Yeah.
because the main character looks like a teddy bear, we do keep it, PG-13 at least. So, preteens can read it. And my niece loves it.
Oh,
My
great.
Owen, my artist, his kids love it. So, I mean, it works for all ages.
Good. Okay. Now you mentioned Owen, and that's your collaborator. You're the writer on the book, but you brought in another person to help with the art. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about your collaborator with this project.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because Owen was actually my best friend in school in grades 7 and 8. And then we parted ways, not, amicably. We just went to different schools and didn't stay in touch. Back in those days, we were both like really interested in comics, and we talked all the time about, doing a comic together one day. And we bumped into each other a few times over the years. As I mentioned before, I started writing Brute because I got this new software, and it just flowed, and the ideas just came, and it just all came together. And I ended up writing like the first 7 issues. And then he actually got in touch with me because he was working on a comic and he wanted me to write for this comic he was working on. And I said, sure, I'm happy to do that, but check out what I'm doing. And he, read through it and he's like, this is awesome. We got to do this. Let me do the art for this. And I'm like, sure. So, and his style is just kind of perfect for what I wanted to go for, because we're not going for like really realistic style.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
We wanted to do something a little bit cartoonish, partly just because that allows me to go like a little bit darker, but still keep it light. You know what I mean?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, what was the collaboration process? You mentioned that you had the story, like issues and issues. So when Owen was brought in, did he immediately say, okay, I'll take it and I'll get back to you when I'm all done? Or was there a back and forth sort of process?
We actually didn't start with anything I'd written, interestingly enough. What we did do is he was in a group called Yeet, which is kind of like a fanzine anthology. And he said, let's send a story into them for Brute. And I'm like, sure. But then it's, you only got 7 pages to work with. Nothing I had written would work in those 7 pages. And you need like your whole 3-act structure in the 7 pages. So it's like, okay, I got to come up with something completely new. But it was great, actually, because it really forced me as a writer to, how do I introduce both the main characters, the themes, the setting, and tell a complete story in 7 pages, which we did.
Wow,
and it was well
amazing.
received. So we did 2 more for Yeet. And then we compiled those into issue number 0, which we released. And then we started working on all the story that I wrote.
Okay, cool. Now, I wanted to bring up another project. I was reading your bio that you have another book called Issachus, the Dream Cat. And I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about that. What is that all about?
Issachus is just an inspired story, I have to say, because when I wrote it, I had no preconceived notions. It basically, they wrote themselves. But Issachus is a really interesting concept, most similar to probably like The Littlest Hobo, which for any younger listeners followed a dog that every episode of this TV series, the dog met somebody new and helped them through some issue, and then he was off to somebody else in the next episode. So Issachus is an Egyptian dream cat that starts off as kind of a mummified stuffed cat. In my original concept, it wasn't a stuffed cat, but that was just too gross. So it became a mummified stuffed cat, which when a child makes an earnest wish, comes alive and then helps the child to manifest that wish. But the cat doesn't do anything itself, right? It just kind of helps the children to realize their own, strengths or powers or voice or, whatever, depending on the story. And then once they've achieved this thing that they'd wanted to, the cat, again, turns back into just a stuffed toy. And then they have to kind of pass it on to somebody else to help their dream come true.
Okay, interesting. Well, we've talked about Brute. It sounds like that's an ongoing project. I wondered, do you have any other up-and-coming projects that you can talk about?
Well, I do have work that I actually did way back in the 90s. I worked with Sir Richard Cumley on Captain Canuck, and that work is now being reprinted and re-released. It was his work from the 90s, so that should be coming out later this year as well.
Nice. I should mention, we didn't talk about this, but we met up at the recent Toronto Comic Con, which was a great opportunity. Lots of people there. Wondering, do you have any plans to attend any future conventions or festivals for later this year?
I do. I will be at the Barrie Comic Con, and I am looking to be hitting other Comic Cons throughout the GTA throughout the summer, but haven't nailed it down with specifically which ones I'll be going to, but as many as I can get to.
Great. Well, with that in mind, do you have a website that you'd recommend people go to find out your future schedule and your future projects?
Yes, they can go to brutecomic.com, BRUTECOMIC.com. Brute's what I'm doing right now. Brute is my Cerebus, or The Walking Dead, in that, I've got a complete story I'm looking to tell. I don't know if it'll be 300 issues. And I admire what Robert Kirkman did in ending at 193, because that's when he was done. He didn't fluff it up to 200 just to hit that, mark. But yeah, I've got a complete story. I know the beginning, I know the end, I know a lot of the in between. And that's what I'm looking to do with Brute, is to tell like a complete story, which is basically just, as I mentioned, broken people forming a broken family, fuddling their way through life, but ultimately finding redemption and their place in society in a truly epic way, because this is a space saga.
Well, Preston, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Well, just, if anybody's listening, if you're a fan of Star Wars or Guardians of the Galaxy, or, any kind of, space saga type work, this should be right up your alley. The main character looking like a teddy bear might work for some people, and other people be kind of like, huh? But, same thing with like Rocket Raccoon at first too. The interesting, like the Guardians didn't work as a comic, but it worked as a movie. We take it seriously, but not so serious. So it's a fun read. And yeah, people who've read it love it. I think you're going to love it. Check it out. And thank you for taking this time. And, and I hope to meet a lot of you guys at the comic conventions this year.
Thanks to Preston for the chat. You can discover more about Brute on brutecomic.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.